pleaded guilty in September to what prosecutors say were horrific sex crimes was sentenced today. 56-year-old Morris Carr of Holden was sentenced to 18 years in prison, and after his release, he'll be on 18 years of probation. Carr sexually assaulted 3 victims under the age of 12 between 2015 to 2017. The judge heard from the state and defense attorneys before deciding on a sentence.
Retribution, the notion that a person should be punished just because society feels as though that would be good to see, is not a legitimate basis for a sentence.
The court finds that an appropriate sentence to serve the unsuspended portion will be 18 years. By that point, the defendant will be 70 years of age. It would be the court's calculation that he will have spent 1/4 of his life in prison.
We're pleased that the justice took this case very seriously, rendered a very thoughtful and well-reasoned opinion, and came out with a sentence that is reflective of the seriousness of the crimes that were perpetrated on these young girls.
Victims were present at the sentencing today, and if Carr violates his probation, he will serve more time in prison.